You think the janitor can solve this? The room chuckled. Not out of cruelty, but out of assumption. Nobody expected Marcus Ellis to walk through that door. Nobody expected the man in a faded green uniform, mop still dripping, to solve a college-level calculus problem in under 3 minutes. But when he picked up that marker, silence fell like snow. And when he finished, everything changed. That Thursday afternoon at Harrison Central High School in Columbus, Ohio, started like any other. Mr. Hawkins, the sarcastic calculus teacher, was scribbling equations on the whiteboard, half of the class barely awake. Then came the moment. A challenge disguised as a joke. "Hey, Marcus," Hawkins called out. "Want to take a shot at this?" What followed wasn't a joke, it was a revelation. And by the end of that day, Marcus Ellis was no longer just the janitor. He was the man who changed how they all saw learning, and themselves. When the final bell rang that day, students didn't rush out with the usual chatter. Something had shifted. The air was heavy with questions no one dared to ask out loud. Who was Marcus Ellis? Most of them had walked past him for years without a second glance. Just the janitor. Just the guy who mopped up their spills and replaced their paper towels. They knew his name only because it was stitched in white thread above his chest pocket. But that afternoon, as he quietly returned to the hallway with his mop, something in the way he moved felt different. Not proud, not smug, just steady, like a man used to walking alone, but no longer hiding. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that Marcus Ellis had once been someone very different. Years earlier, Marcus had walked the halls of a different kind of building, not a high school, but the engineering wing of the University of Michigan. He'd earned his way in, full academic scholarship, top of his high school class in Detroit, known for building small motors out of scrap parts and teaching himself how to fix anything with moving gears. His mother, Gloria, raised him and his two younger sisters alone, working double shifts at a packaging plant. She didn't have much, but what she had, she gave. And she gave him one belief that never left him. Education is the key, baby, and you carry your own key no matter what doors they lock. He carried that key with pride. Freshman year, he'd been tutoring fellow students by week 3. Professors took notice. He was focused, driven, and for the first time, he felt the future opening wide. Then came the phone call. It was his sister, Jasmine. Their mother had collapsed at work. Stage 4. No warning, no time. Marcus packed his bags that night and took the next bus home. He told his professors he'd return after a semester. He meant it. But time has a cruel way of slipping past when you're racing to hold your world together. One semester became 2. Then came the jobs. Overnight stock at a grocery store, part-time security at a warehouse. He worked days, nights, and every hour in between. By the time his mother passed away, Marcus was barely holding on. The scholarship was gone. His place in school replaced by a mailbox filled with bills. There was no counselor calling to ask why he hadn't returned. No safety net, just responsibility. And so the dream faded quietly, not because he gave up, but because life demanded more urgent things. He moved from city to city, did whatever work he could find. He never got in trouble, never asked for much. He just kept going. Years blurred into each other, one job to the next, always the man behind the scenes. By the time he arrived in Columbus, Ohio in his early 40s, he wasn't chasing dreams anymore. He just wanted stability. The school district offered health benefits, steady hours, and summers off. He took the janitor job without hesitation. But the numbers never left him. He didn't talk about it, but sometimes he'd catch himself glancing at the equations on classroom whiteboards as he passed by. Like muscle memory, his brain would start solving before he realized it. At night in his small one-bedroom apartment, he'd make himself a simple dinner, grilled salmon, brown rice, maybe some steamed vegetables, and flip through an old engineering textbook he kept behind the cereal boxes. The pages were worn, dog-eared. A few had small notes scribbled in the margins, shortcuts he'd discovered years ago. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He just wanted to make sure he still had it. He always did, but no one knew, because no one ever asked. Until that moment in Mr. Hawkins' classroom, when someone finally looked his way, if only to laugh. And instead of shrinking back, Marcus stepped forward. Not for glory, not for applause, but because something deep inside him whispered, "It's time." After that unforgettable Thursday, the halls of Harrison Central felt different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. The change started in the small moments, the sideways glances that lasted a second too long, the shy smiles from students who used to rush past with earbuds in and eyes down. It was in the quiet. Marcus Ellis had returned to his routine like nothing had happened. He still clocked in at 6:45 every morning, still replaced broken light bulbs and unclogged bathroom sinks with quiet diligence. But now he could feel the difference in the air, like people were watching, like they were seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. It started with Caleb. He was a sophomore with a habit of slouching in his seat and pretending not to care. But something in his eyes had shifted after Marcus solved that calculus problem. The next day, Caleb waited outside the janitor's closet with a notebook clutched to his chest and a half-smile that couldn't hide his nervousness. "Mr. Ellis," he said, voice cracking like he hadn't used it all day. I, um, I tried to do a problem like the one you solved yesterday. I think I messed it up. Could you maybe check it?" Marcus blinked, surprised. He was still holding a mop. "You want me to look at it?" Caleb nodded. "Only if you've got time." Marcus leaned against the wall, took the notebook and studied it. He didn't correct the mistake right away. He asked Caleb a question, then another. And by the time they reached the answer together, Caleb was grinning like someone had just turned the lights on inside him. "Thanks, Mr. Ellis," he whispered, almost embarrassed. Marcus simply nodded. "You did most of the work." That was all it took. By the end of the week, 3 more students had stopped by. A junior named Lena, a freshman named Isaiah, a girl who didn't speak at all, just handed Marcus a math worksheet with her eyes full of hope. Word spread fast, not through official channels but through whispers and DMS. They started calling them Ellis sessions. It wasn't formal. There were no whiteboards or lesson plans. Just a corner of the library, a cluster of students, and Marcus sitting among them with a calm voice and a pencil behind his ear. He didn't lecture. He listened. He didn't give them the answers. He helped them find their own. And in doing so, he gave them something far more valuable than solutions. He gave them belief. "I used to think I was just bad at math," Lena told him once, after solving her first real equation without help. "Turns out I just needed someone who didn't talk down to me." That hit Marcus harder than she knew, because for years he'd lived in the background, purposefully, quietly. And now here he was, not standing in front of a classroom with a title, but sitting side by side with kids who saw him as more than a man with a mop. They started showing up early, staying late. Some even skipped lunch to get 5 extra minutes of his time. He kept a little spiral notebook in his back pocket to jot down problems they struggled with and ideas for how to explain things better. Even some teachers began to notice. Miss Abernathy from chemistry stopped by one day and lingered near the library shelves, watching Marcus explain a trigonometry trick using nothing but a folded piece of paper and a bottle cap. "You've got a gift," she told him afterward. "Not just with math, with kids." Marcus smiled, a little unsure. "They make it easy." She shook her head. "No, they make it real. You make it reachable." But not everyone was so open-hearted. In the faculty lounge, the buzz was mixed. Some teachers offered quiet support. Others avoided the topic altogether. And then there was Mr. Hawkins. He hadn't spoken to Marcus since that day in the classroom. He didn't acknowledge the videos now circling the internet. Videos that showed Marcus calmly solving equations while students looked on in awe. But he noticed. Everyone did. By now, the clip had been reposted dozens of times. Captioned things like, "Our janitor just outsmarted the calculus teacher," or "Proof you never know someone's story." It wasn't meant to shame anyone, but truth has a way of making people uncomfortable, especially when it comes from the quietest corner of the room. And Marcus stayed humble. When a student told him, "You should be teaching full-time," he'd smile and say, "I'm just helping where I can." But deep inside, something was stirring. Not pride, not ambition. Something older. Something he thought he'd buried years ago. Purpose. And in the weeks that followed, that quiet purpose would grow into something no one at Harrison Central, least of all Marcus, could have seen coming. The library grew louder, not in volume, but in energy. Every Tuesday and Thursday after the final bell, a strange thing began to happen at Harrison Central High. Students didn't leave. They drifted instead toward the far corner of the library, notebooks in hand, calculators in their backpacks, eyes bright with curiosity. It wasn't mandatory, it wasn't for extra credit, it was because Marcus Ellis would be there. Some kids sat on the floor, others stood, leaning over one another's shoulders. A few simply watched, trying to soak it all in. Marcus never stood in front like a teacher. He sat beside them. He asked questions before giving answers. He listened more than he spoke. And that is what made it feel different. They weren't just learning math, they were learning confidence. But while the students leaned in, Mr. Hawkins pulled away. He hadn't said a word to Marcus since the day he challenged him in front of the class. He hadn't addressed the moment, hadn't acknowledged the now viral clip that made its way from TikTok to Facebook to a local education forum. Janitor solves calculus faster than the teacher, the headline practically screamed. The comments were relentless. Dude broke it down better than my college professor. Someone give this man a classroom and a chalkboard, not a mop. Mr. Hawkins wasn't on social media, but he didn't have to be. The stares in the hallway told him everything. At first he went silent, too silent. His sarcasm dulled. His tone grew sharper. He stopped calling on students randomly, stopped joking at their expense. He taught with his eyes glued to the board, barely looking at the class. Students noticed. Teachers noticed. Even Principal Patterson noticed. It rattled him, Miss Abernathy whispered to a colleague in the teacher's lounge. He's not used to being shown up, especially not by someone he never saw coming. And that was the truth. For years, Marcus Ellis had existed on the periphery of their world, a background figure, invisible, silent, safe. But now his presence couldn't be ignored. And it wasn't just students talking. Parents began asking questions during conferences. Some teachers quietly observed his sessions from the back of the library, taking mental notes. One even borrowed a method he used to explain derivatives with colored paper clips and a roll of tape. Then came the phone call. Principal Patterson had been fielding media requests all week, politely declining interviews and thanking the community for their support. But one call stood out, a board member from the district. "We saw the footage," the voice said. "We're impressed. Is Mr. Ellis certified to teach?" "No," the principal replied. "He's not faculty." There was a pause. "Then what is he?" Patterson answered without blinking. "He's an educator. He just doesn't have the paperwork." They didn't like that answer. The next morning, an anonymous complaint appeared in the school board inbox. Is it appropriate for a janitor, who is not a certified instructor, to tutor students? What safeguards are in place? Has he been background checked for academic instruction? The tone wasn't concern. It was control. Patterson handled it swiftly. She knew Marcus had been employed by the district for years, background checked, trusted, beloved. She never told him about the complaint, but Marcus, he felt it. He felt it in the lingering stares from staff who used to nod politely, in the way some teachers suddenly changed topics when he walked by, in the way Hawkins, once bold and brash, now refused to make eye contact entirely. He didn't take offense. He didn't complain. He simply kept showing up, but not everyone resisted. That Thursday, as he wrapped up a lesson on logarithmic functions, with 3 students huddled around him, something unexpected happened. Mr. Hawkins entered the library. For a moment, the room tensed. Even the students paused. Marcus looked up from the worksheet, calm as ever. "Mind if I sit in?" Hawkins asked, voice quieter than usual. Marcus nodded slowly, gesturing to an empty chair. "Long as you don't mind learning something." The kids laughed, nervously at first, then genuinely. Even Hawkins cracked a half smile. It wasn't mean this time. It was human. He sat down. He didn't speak much. He just listened. For 10 quiet minutes, the man who once challenged Marcus as a joke now watched him teach with grace, patience, and ease. And though he didn't say it aloud, Hawkins began to understand something that had eluded him all along. Power doesn't come from a title. It comes from the way people lean in when you speak, and the way they believe they can rise when you're near. By the time the bell rang, Hawkins was still sitting, and something in his eyes had softened. It wasn't surrender, It was respect, hard-earned and long overdue. Marcus never asked for more. He never craved a promotion, a title, or even recognition. He simply wanted to do work that mattered, even if no one saw it. But now people were seeing him, and that was the part he wasn't prepared for. One rainy Monday afternoon, as students trickled out of the library, Principal Patterson called Marcus into her office. He arrived still wearing his work gloves, his jacket damp from cleaning up a cafeteria leak. He removed his hat out of habit, more out of respect than routine. Patterson smiled gently, motioning for him to sit. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Marcus sat but stayed upright, hands resting on his knees. "Everything all right?" She leaned forward, fingers laced. "I spoke with the school board. They've been watching the response to your tutoring. It's not just the students. You're impacting the whole culture here." Marcus blinked, unsure where this was going. "They'd like to formalize it," she continued. "Turn your tutoring sessions into an official after-school enrichment program. Small group instruction. You'd be paid for the extra time, of course." He didn't respond right away. His eyes lowered. He studied his calloused hands, the faint stains of cleaning solution that never quite came out no matter how much he scrubbed. "I'm not a teacher," he said softly. "No," she agreed. "You're not certified. But Marcus, you are a teacher, in every way that matters." He exhaled slowly, trying to find words. "I haven't stood in front of a classroom since college. I don't know how to manage a program, lesson plans, schedules." "We'll help with that," she said. "You won't be alone. And it's not about making you a full-time instructor. It's just giving you space and support to keep doing what you're already doing." Marcus leaned back slightly, his shoulders tense. It wasn't fear holding him back. It was something else. Something older. Something harder to name. For so many years, he'd survived by staying invisible, by not expecting more than a paycheck and a quiet place to work. The idea of stepping into the light, even a little, felt like cracking open a door he'd long since boarded shut. But what haunted him more than attention was the possibility of failing again. He looked up. "Let me think about it." Patterson nodded. "Take your time." That night, Marcus pulled out the old cardboard box from under his bed, the one he hadn't touched in years. Inside was his Michigan sweatshirt, faded but still whole, his college transcripts, an old scientific calculator, and a photo, him and his mom standing on the steps of the engineering building, her arm around him like she already knew he'd make it. He laid everything out on the kitchen table, sat down, and just stared. The papers had yellowed, the ink had faded, but the knowledge, it had never left him. He didn't sleep much that night. He didn't need to. The next afternoon, he returned to Patterson's office. Still no suit, still no speech. Just Marcus. "I appreciate the offer," he began. She braced herself for a no. "But I'd like to keep it simple," he said. "No title, no schedule. Let the kids come because they want to, not because it's on their calendar." Patterson smiled, relieved and somehow more proud than she expected to be. "Then we'll support you however we can." Word spread quietly. The sessions continued. Nothing flashy, no posters. Just a man, a few notebooks, and a growing group of students who showed up because they felt safe, seen, and capable. And Marcus? He kept his mop, kept his gloves. But now, tucked into the back pocket of his work pants, he also carried a small black binder. Inside were blank worksheets, equations he scribbled down between shifts, and teaching notes written in the same handwriting he once used to annotate textbooks in college. He added to it during lunch breaks, while waiting for supplies, even while riding the bus home. Because something inside him had shifted too. He still didn't have a title, but now he had a voice. And more importantly, he had students who listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. By now, the sessions in the corner of the library had grown into something no one could have predicted. It wasn't just about solving equations anymore. It was about solving something inside the students themselves. Every Tuesday and Thursday, just after the final bell, they gathered, sometimes 5, sometimes 15. Backpacks hit the floor, calculators came out, and notebooks opened to pages creased from effort. But what mattered most wasn't what they brought. It was what they carried away. Marcus didn't lecture, he guided, he didn't ask for attention, he gave it. And for kids who had spent years feeling invisible in classrooms that moved too fast or judged too quickly, that mattered more than they could put into words. There was Isaiah, a freshman who'd nearly failed algebra the semester before. Quiet kid, always sat in the back. But week after week, he showed up, wide-eyed, a little nervous, and desperate not to look lost. One afternoon, Marcus slid a worksheet across the table and said, "You already know how to do this. You just haven't said it out loud yet." Isaiah blinked, then nodded. By the end of the semester, he was helping other students with quadratic equations, shoulders straight, voice steady. Then there was Tasha, a junior who used to roll her eyes anytime someone mentioned math. "I'm not built for this," she'd joke. But Marcus never laughed at that line. He only said, "You're built for more than you think." A few months later, she was running her own Saturday mini-sessions at home, teaching her younger cousins using Marcus's notes. In his presence, something shifted in them. Not because he gave easy answers, but because he made them believe they could find the answers themselves. That's what stayed. It wasn't the formulas written in ink. It was the belief written into their bones. Other teachers noticed too. Miss Abernathy from chemistry stopped by again, not to observe, but to learn. "The way you explained rate of change the other day, can I borrow that for my class?" Marcus just smiled and nodded. "It's yours." Even Coach Ramirez, who barely taught anything beyond weight training, approached him in the hallway. "Think you could help with a summer prep group for incoming freshmen? We lose a lot of them in their first year of math." Marcus blinked, taken aback. "You think they'd want to learn from me?" Coach shrugged. "They already are." And then there was Mr. Hawkins. He didn't say much, still kept to himself, but something in his presence had softened. On more than one occasion, he showed up to the library, not to teach, not to correct, just to sit. Sometimes he'd drop off an extra problem or two. Sometimes he'd say nothing at all. But one afternoon, as the last student left and the room emptied, Hawkins lingered. He stood by the whiteboard, staring at the neat lines of work Marcus had just written. "You know," he said, voice low, "I used to think this job made me important. That teaching gave me power." Marcus said nothing. He just waited. "But you reminded me what it's really about," Hawkins added, turning to him. "Showing up, making it count." Marcus gave a quiet nod. "We all lose our way sometimes." There was no tension, no apology, just two men standing in a room where something had been broken, and now something was beginning to heal. Back in the hallway, a group of students waited, books in hand, hope in their eyes. And Marcus? He didn't have a degree. He didn't wear a badge. But every time he pulled out his binder and looked into those young faces, he knew exactly who he was. He wasn't just helping them learn math. He was helping them find the courage to believe in themselves, the kind of belief that could carry them far beyond the walls of that school. Because some of the greatest lessons don't come from a classroom. They come from people who show up and stay. Let me know when you're ready for part 7, The Quiet Legacy, the heartfelt, reflective conclusion to Marcus's journey, where his quiet influence takes root in the lives of the next generation. Spring came to Harrison Central High, not with fanfare, but with the soft bloom of something earned. The annual student showcase was always a big event. Science projects lined the gym, choral groups warmed up in the auditorium, and parents milled about with coffee cups and tired smiles. But this year, something felt different. In one quiet corner of the gym, under a handmade banner that read, "Dorsey's Table," there sat a display that didn't sparkle with lights or tech. It sparkled with gratitude. Neatly arranged were dozens of handwritten letters from students, folded notebook paper, printed essays, even a few drawings. At the center, a poster board read, "Thank you for showing us who we could be." Marcus stood to the side, not behind the table, not in front of it, just nearby. Hands in his pockets, eyes warm but hesitant. He didn't wear a suit, didn't give a speech. When students came by, he smiled, nodded, sometimes shook their hands. That was enough, because this wasn't about recognition. It was about remembrance. He read one letter left anonymously. "Mr. Ellis, I used to think smart people looked a certain way or came from a certain place. You showed me that strength isn't loud. It's patient. I want to be like that one day. Another. You never made me feel stupid even when I was. I've never had a teacher believe in me until you. Marcus folded each one carefully, like he was tucking away pieces of his own heart. After the event, he walked home with a cardboard box under his arm, not heavy with objects, but full of meaning. He stepped into his small apartment, placed the box on the kitchen table, and sat in silence for a long while. Then, for the first time in years, he reached under the bed and pulled out the old University of Michigan sweatshirt. He didn't put it on. He didn't need to. He folded it gently, placed it in a new bin beside the letters, and added one last item, a photo of him and his mother, Bernice, on the day he first left for college. She was holding his face in her hands, telling him to carry his own key, and somehow, he had. It just took him longer to find the door. The following Monday, as students bustled through the halls, something had changed, not in the building, but in the way they moved through it. More nods, more greetings, more pauses by the janitor's closet, not to complain or request, but to say thank you. And then there was Caleb. He waited until Marcus was alone in the cafeteria, binder open, pencil in hand. He approached slowly, holding something behind his back. "I got you something," Caleb said. Marcus raised a brow. "Oh?" Caleb revealed a small wooden plaque. On it, etched with imperfect lines and adolescent pride, were the words, "Mr. Ellis, Teacher of Quiet Power." Marcus blinked, once, twice. Then slowly, he reached out and took the plaque in his hands. "This means more than you know," he said, voice almost breaking. Caleb smiled. "We know." Later that afternoon, Principal Patterson called him into her office again. "There's been talk," she said gently. "The board wants to offer you something more formal, an elective. You'd design the class. No grades, no pressure, just math, mentorship, and confidence building. We'd call it an enrichment program, but everyone here knows what it really is, a bridge." Marcus sat in silence for a moment, then shook his head softly. "Thank you, truly. But I'd rather keep it how it is." Patterson tilted her head. "No title?" "No title," he smiled. "Let them come because they want to, not because they're told to." She smiled back. "Then we'll support you, exactly as you are." Word spread beyond the district. A local reporter dropped by to write a feature. Marcus declined a formal interview. "I'm not the story," he said. "The kids are." Still, the story grew, quietly, respectfully. And in time, it wasn't about a janitor who solved a calculus problem. It was about a man who reminded a school what education could really mean. Because Marcus Ellis didn't need a chalkboard to teach. He didn't need a podium to lead. All he needed was a chair, a student who dared to ask, and the courage to sit beside them and say, "You're more capable than you know. Let's find the answer together." And in doing so, he built something no mop ever could. He built legacy, not the kind made of accolades or applause, but the kind made of people. Young lives changed, eyes lifted, hope rekindled, and long after Marcus Ellis would retire, long after his name faded from rosters or storage room keys, his students, his kids would still carry him forward in the way they listened, in the way they lifted others, and in the way they dared to show up and for someone else, just like Mr. Ellis had shown up for them. Life lessons from the story of Marcus Ellis. Sometimes the most profound wisdom doesn't come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from the quiet one who simply shows up. The story of Marcus Ellis reminds us that legacy isn't built through titles, degrees, or applause. It's built through compassion, consistency, and the courage to lift others, even when no one is watching. Marcus didn't ask to be seen. He didn't seek recognition. Yet by simply sharing what he knew and believing in young people when they didn't believe in themselves, he changed the direction of lives. This is a story for anyone who's ever felt overlooked, for those who gave up dreams to care for others, for those who worked in silence, day after day, thinking no one noticed. To our elders watching this, your story still matters. Your knowledge, your scars, your quiet strength, it all still has purpose. The world needs the calm hands, the listening hearts, the steady presence that only you can give. And if you've ever questioned whether it's too late to make a difference, remember Marcus. Sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from standing in front of a classroom. They come from sitting beside someone and saying, "You've got more inside you than you think." So if this touched you, share it. Tell someone. Show up, because you are someone's quiet hero too.